Happy birthday, Famicom. At 2 years of age, you are not yet a man, but you are more than a Game Boy. The first arrival at Famicom's second birthday bash is Konami, who bring us another racing game.
Road Fighter has a very different look and playstyle from Antarctic Adventure. Also, please don't get the wrong idea about Konami. They would not, over the years, primarily publish racing games for Famicom. I guess they needed to get these out of their system or something. Road Fighter, despite its name, does not actually involve fighting. This might come as a surprise based on first appearances, as Road Fighter looks an awful lot like Midway's Spy Hunter. The commonality between the two games goes beyond the top-down racing perspective. The design and color of the vehicles here combine into a very Spy Hunter-esque aesthetic overall. But no, you don't have machine guns or oil slicks, and if you smash into other cars, you'll just go spinning off onto the shoulder and explode. Road Fighter owes a lot more in terms of its design to the likes of Zippy Race and Monaco GP, both of which will be familiar from Sega Gaiden. The action here plays out as a timed race in which you need to reach a goal before the clock runs down, just like Antarctic Adventure. You really only have a few details to concern yourself with here. You can drive fast, you can drive slightly faster, you can swerve to avoid cars, and you can snag rainbow car icons to top off your fuel. Running into another vehicle will send you into a spin-out that will very likely cause your car to explode, although it is possible to rebound back into control by spinning accidentally into other cars. Exploding isn't the end of the race, but it does cause you to effectively lose about 10 points of precious fuel out of the 100 you begin with. You're deducted some points for the crash, and you'll burn through a few more points as you get back up to speed upon your return to the road. So basically, you don't want to crash. Honestly, avoiding other cars isn't that difficult, at least when you play on the basic difficulty setting. As with most games of this era, Road Fighter hails from arcades, and the developers attempted to recalibrate it for home play. I haven't really touched on this in NES Works Gaiden, but the vast majority of Famicom games from this era offer A and B selections at the title screen, which amount to difficulty settings. Typically, A offers relatively easy play, while B skews closer to quarter-gobbling arcade brutality. This tide has begun to turn now that Famicom has reached its second birthday, and AB difficulty will grow increasingly scarce as the system's offerings leave behind their arcade origins in favor of larger, less challenge-oriented bespoke works crafted specifically for the console environment. Road Fighter is not bespoke, so you can select B difficulty and find yourself dealing with more and more ferocious rival drivers. The artificial intelligence controlling other cars works almost exactly as in the SG-1000's mini racers. They drive in a beeline until you approach, at which point they will attempt to drift into you, converging toward the column of road pixels you occupied when they first became aware of you. These cars do offer at least a little variety in their behavior beyond simple drifting, based on their color and design. For example, the most basic yellow cars do nothing, while red cars will drift a fixed distance in your direction. Dark blue cars veer more aggressively than red, while lighter blue cars will drift the same distance as their darker counterparts before reorienting to drift a second time in whichever direction you may have moved. Road Fighter does give you a little more room to maneuver than Zippy Race did, and the road doesn't branch in the same way to force you to memorize which path you should take in order to collect essential fuel. So I find it a little more fun. At least a little more fun than the SG-1000 version of Zippy Race. Irem won't ship the Famicom port for at least a few more months, so Road Fighter has the proverbial road to itself. To keep the racing metaphor going, Konami's racing lineup feels a bit like the Famicom attempting to catch up with SG-1000's output. That said, Road Fighter pulls even with the competition, and maybe even takes a little bit of a lead. It's simple, yes, but Konami seems to have shrugged off the lethargy that affected its port of Yar Kung Fu to deliver a fast, smooth, highly playable racer. Yeah, it's pretty basic here in the year of our Lord 2022, but back in the summer of 1985, I feel like this would have been a pretty hot pickup.
Next up, Namco unwraps a home conversion of a largely forgotten arcade game.
Despite its new title, which I assume was meant as a way to catch the attention of Pac-Man fans, Warpman actually began life as Warp and Warp. Warp and Warp never gained much traction in arcades, and ultimately ended up being whisked into obscurity by Namco's incredible contemporary arcade releases. I mean, this game was up against coin-op Goliaths like Pac-Man, Mappy, Galaga, the Tower of Draga, and what was that other one? Oh right, Xevious. It can't be easy to hail from such a talented bloodline, and Warp and Warp ended up as the sibling that tried harder than the rest, but still ended up being written out of the will. Its Famicom port, Warpman, demonstrates that this was a worthy scion all along. It's a little difficult to describe Warpman without leaning on the crutch of explaining it in terms of other games, so let's do that. Basically, what you have here is a game that feels carved from the same materials as Stern's Berserk, Midway's Wizard of War, and Williams' Robotron 2084. Of course, there's also a lot of Pac-Man here, but that seems right and good because this does, after all, come to us from the same developer that created Pac-Man in the first place, and certainly they had more of a right than anyone to continue iterating on that concept. Except maybe for the theoretical science group at University of Tokyo. Anyway, Warpman drops you into what amounts to basically a big, empty void of space. You play the role of a small, stocky spaceman with a gun, who must defend himself by gunning down a horde of aliens that materializes around the perimeter of the screen one by one. Once you gun down a fixed quota of aliens, as denoted by the alien kill hashes along the left side of the screen, you move along to a wholly new void of space where the aliens are faster, more clever, and more difficult to shoot, because of all the interstellar clutter that blocks your shots. This makes for a reasonably fun, if somewhat mindless kind of video game. The aliens initially demonstrate very basic behaviors. They spawn near the corners of the screen and move around it in a clockwise direction, steadily moving inward as they round the corners. Kind of like the way the aliens in Space Invaders would drop down a column once they hit the edge of the screen. Maybe they're all the same aliens, who knows? Some enemies will fire back at you while you shoot at them, and if you manage to survive long enough, you'll need to deal with aliens that are slightly less imbecilic. Some of them shoot more often, or more erratically, and some can briefly become invincible. Still, it's not that complex, though it does offer an option for two-player simultaneous action, which seems like it would be fun for people who live with someone that likes to play old video games. I don't. However, this is not the extent of what Warpman has to offer. Sometimes you see the aliens you destroy drop items. Usually this amounts to a letter icon that you can collect in order to spell a word and earn an extra life. Every once in a while, however, an alien will drop a crucifix. Couldn't say why, but collecting one of these cross icons will cause you to teleport into a completely different game mode that runs in parallel to the standard stages. Although you move around similarly to the basic mode here and continue to be dogged by aliens, the secondary phase takes place in a dense maze. Here, the aliens move through the corridors of the maze more unpredictably than in the scenes where they simply spiral inward from the corners. On top of that, you lose access to your space gun. Instead, you are forced to drop time bombs whose detonations destroy aliens. This scenario may remind the cultured modern game enthusiast of Hudson's Bomberman series, but wait! The parallels run deeper than that. If you manage to destroy an alien with a bomb, your bomb becomes more powerful. The more aliens you kill, the more your bomb grows in destructive force, with the range of its explosions increasing. Of course, Bomberman wouldn't ship on Famicom for another few months, but that game had already put in an appearance on home computers back in 1983. Oh, but wait, Warp and Warp actually dates back to 1981, so you are absolutely entitled to raise a suspicious eyebrow at Hudson here. Anyway, you can end a bonus Bomberman-style round by destroying a set number of aliens, as in the standard mode, but that doesn't return you to the regular Space Void stage setting. Instead, you'll simply advance to another maze, more challenging than the last. In order to return to the standard mode, you need to snag another crucifix icon. You can do this anytime a cross appears, and things will return to normal. Well, mostly normal. Upon exiting the maze scenario, you're reunited with your handgun, but it will have changed. Rather than simply firing a tiny little bullet across the screen, your weapon will now fire a tiny little bullet that explodes like a bomb upon impact. This has obvious benefits in that it makes gunning down aliens way easier. Rather than using precision fire and careful timing, you can now unleash some shots that fly wild and explode when they strike a wall or asteroid, clearing out a set of aliens. They'll also explode if you hit an alien, meaning you can wipe out a cluster of enemies with a single well-placed shot. However, you can also quite easily wipe out your own self with a single shot. The explosive burst of your upgraded weapon is deadly to everything: aliens, your ally, and yourself. So while arming yourself with a superpowered explosive bomb gun seems cool and good, it demands an element of caution as you spray the screen with fire. Hit an alien at close range, and that about wraps it up for you, making for a fun, if convoluted, risk-reward element. Honestly, Warpman seems like the original game would have been a little too convoluted to be a true arcade classic the way its better peers were. Here on Famicom, though, it feels quite right at home, with cooperative play, 2 modes of action, and the ever-present question of dare I or daren't I when it comes to supercharging your weapon. All in all, it's quality fare.
And over in the big box by the sheet cake, we have the best gift from Nintendo's new best pals, developer Chunsoft and publisher Enix.
Sure, they may not seem super remarkable with this debut release, Door, but they would eventually become two of the most important forces on Famicom. Here you play as Chun, a white blob in a colorful baseball cap. Yes, that's Chun, as in Chunsoft, the game lent the studio its name. Well, sort of. Chunsoft is also a nod to company founder Koichi Nakamura. According to a 2014 Famitsu interview translated by the inimitable Shmuplations, Nakamura's friends called him Chun, after the mahjong tile which sported a kanji symbol that also appears in Nakamura's name. So, somewhat obliquely, Door's protagonist, and therefore the entire company, take its name from the game's creator. There's even a small nod to this trivium on the game's packaging. Hidden inside one of the flaps of Door's Famicom box, you can find a small drawing of a mahjong Chun tile. A neat little Easter egg. Anyway, Door possesses more perspicacious portent than its whimsical design and its little wink of self-referentialism would suggest. Both Chunsoft and Enix debut here, without even the slightest indication of the profound impact they would collectively exert on the console, and really upon video gaming in general, just a few months later. Enix, of course, didn't really make its own games. It existed as a publisher, a label for acquisitions by outside creators, which it would help fund and bring to market. Chunsoft was but one of many creators who fell into Enix's orbit, and Nakamura took the same path to arrive there that a great many of the publisher's other collaborators did. Namely, he won a contest. Like a lot of publishers in Japan around this time, Enix bulked up its library by conducting contests in which amateur game designers would submit their work. Winning contestants would receive prize money and the right to ship their creation under the Enix label. My understanding is that Enix was quite prolific when it came to these contests, publishing games for Japanese home computers like the PC 8801. Door began life as one of these projects. Like many programmers of the early 1980s, Nakamura got his start creating ersatz versions of arcade hits before moving along to this, his very first original project, and Enix liked it so much they shipped it. And then they let him reprogram it for the Famicom, where it fits right in. Although it began life as a home computer creation, it feels very much a kindred spirit to single-screen arcade-style action titles like Popeye, Donkey Kong, and Nuts and Milk, the latter of which, of course, also began as a computer game. Admittedly, by summer 1985, the Famicom had already begun to gravitate away from single-screen action titles toward more complex works, but Door still feels relevant. I mean, Wrecking Crew had just shipped a few weeks earlier, and that game seemed to borrow liberally from Chunsoft's creation with its simpler application of the door mechanic. Where Wrecking Crew allowed you to send enemies through doors in order to bump them into a less dangerous space while you focused on other things, Door's entire gimmick revolves around trapping monsters behind doors. Chun can basically only walk and jump, but he does have the ability to open and close doors located around each level by walking past them. Note that he can only open a door if he walks past them in the proper direction. Each door has a handle, and you need to pass a door from the direction in which the handle is oriented in order to pull it open behind you. Likewise, you can close an open door, an essential skill for trapping enemies inside the unknown void behind the frame, by walking in reverse, beginning with the direction in which the door is open and passing over to the other side. Some doors have two handles, which doesn't make mechanical sense, but means you can open them from either side. However, once a double-sided door has been opened, you can only close it by approaching it from the direction opposite the one you initially crossed it from. The monsters that pursue Chun operate under a set of somewhat predictable rules, similar to Pac-Man monsters, moving in Chun's general direction but meandering according to their personal proclivities. One creature, for example, will pretty much make a direct beeline for Chun. The orange squid guy, on the other hand, seems to want to play Amedekuji and will move in Chun's direction but can't resist the allure of any ladder it passes across. You can leap over enemies to evade them, and you can leap over doors in order to avoid opening or closing them. Leaping only goes so far though. Eventually a green guy who leaps whenever Chun does shows up to force you to unlearn all your evasive maneuvers. The one thing you can count on when it comes to the monsters is that they can't help but walk into an open door. When a monster sees an open door, it enters an open door. However, the monster only stays inside the open door for a few seconds, after which it will wander out again and your hard work will go to waste. So you need to position yourself to be able to close the door behind a creature, permanently sealing it into the phantom zone or whatever. And once a door traps a monster, the door's handle completely disappears. Harsh. Of course, the secret to success in Door is to shut as many monsters as possible behind a single door in one go. Once you learn to herd and lead enemies by exploiting their AI, you can entrap a whole load of them at once and rack up high scores. It's a simple enough concept, but the difficulty escalates rapidly. If there's a shortcoming to Door, it's that it offers no password or level select feature that I've been able to dig up, which means that every time you run out of lives, you have to slog through the opening stages all over again from the very beginning, which makes the prospect of reaching stage 50, the end, without relying on save states, a deeply exhausting one. Door proved fairly popular across multiple platforms, doing well enough that it allowed Nakamura to staff up and release a follow-up game for PC 88, Neutron, which also featured Chun as its hero. However, any plans that may have existed to turn Chun into a corporate mascot character on par with Mario were immediately derailed once Door shipped for Famicom. Enix tapped Chunsoft to handle the Famicom conversion of a murder mystery PC game called Portopia Renzoku Satsujin Jiken, which connected Nakamura with a game designer by the name of Yuji Horii. The two would go on to collaborate next on a little thing called Dragon Quest, which would lead to all sorts of interesting knock-on effects, not least of which would be Chunsoft essentially inventing the console roguelike genre as a Dragon Quest spin-off. But those are tales for future episodes. In the here and now, Door is a cute little platformer that would be worth playing even if it didn't help pave the way for gaming's future.
Next time on NES Works Gaiden, it's The Rise of the Robots.